Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we discuss all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.
Zoe, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, not too shabby actually. I'm doing pretty well. We've had some pretty insightful conversations. Today, specifically, we're going to go over, I guess, the parents' words and how much of an influence it actually has on the kids. Now, we're going to talk about it from from a sports performance perspective as well. Also applies to coaches in terms of the language that they use, because I'm trying to catch my breath. All right. So, from who I've worked with in the past, language is powerful. You know, there's old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Words can influence you. That's a big thing. It's like, especially from a point of authority. And as coaches, we are essentially a point of authority. Parents, point of authority. Treasurers, presidents of clubs and all that jazz. Sports coaches, assistants and all that. Umpires. What they do say has a huge influence on the kids. So yeah, let's break it down a little bit more in that department. So from a training perspective, especially with like sports training or even training in the gym, how much of an impact do you see that words have on the kids that we're coaching?
Massively. They come into this place and we're the person that they come to for any information. So they basically take whatever we say as Bible half the time. So the way that you frame what you're trying to say is just massive. If you're saying, I'll use it like a squat, for example. If you say, if you squat like this, you're going to hurt, I don't know, your back, or deadlift. If you deadlift like this, you're going to hurt your back. Then they're going to be thinking about their back the entire time while they're doing it. They might even think that they feel pain while they're doing it.
It's such a fear response.
Yeah. And it can come that way with, if you talk about food, even if you talk about stress, like if you stress too much, then your body's going to go into this state of like fight, whatever.
What do they do? Stress.
Yeah.
Stress about stress.
Don't stress. They stress.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. Like, you know, when like you hear parents and they see the kids running off, it's like, stop that. And it's like, what are they going to do? Like, be like a deer in the headlights and do nothing? Of course not. They're going to continue to run around and carry on like a little pork chop.
Pork chop.
Yeah, I like using that term, pork chop. So what I've actually said, usually, one, you want to get them to shift their focus. It's all about attention and focus and where it is. If their focus is on, making a mess, causing a ruckus, maybe try and shift that to something else where they're being constructive with their hands or something like that, especially with young kids. I'm not a parent or anything like that, so I don't know how that works, but I think it just takes time and repetition in order to ingrain it in them. And also modeling as well. I think modeling is a big thing, a big thing with that. But when we talk with our athletes, say like, oh, my knee hurts or my back hurts or something like that. Okay, cool. So what we do is we try to address it and see if we can try and fix it, or at least continue them to train with the same movement. Or as a result, we will tend to modify their training session. And it's like, look, we'll reassess next time you come in. If it continues to get worse or there's no progress, we'll refer you on to an osteo or a physio as a result. But the last thing we want to do is say this movement's going to cause pain, or X is going to cause Y. And the reason why is because they're going to have some sort of adverse effect to it. And then psychologically, they think it really is going to cause pain, especially if they come across and they join a new program or something like that. It's like, I've been told not to do this. It's like, why? Because the person who told me this last time said it's going to cause me issues. And I'm like, and they're like, what? How? Like, what's the mechanism behind that? It's like that belief that it's going to cause pain is the root of the issue than anything else. Because we can, as human beings, we can pretty much do anything that we want, but we're really bound by our beliefs, essentially, on what we create for ourselves. If our belief is we're going to do X, Y, and Z, we're going to do majority of the time, we'll eventually achieve X, Y, and Z. Then let's talk about the food side and see how it influences the words that we say around certain foods. How does that, interplay in terms of like creating like healthier habits?
Yeah, so what we kind of commonly see in parents around sport is either saying, or not even around sport, just in general, is either saying, you're eating so much, why are you eating so much, or why are you not eating enough? And both of these cause...
I'll add a third one, or they demonize certain foods.
Ah, yes. Yes, yes, yes. And what these all do is just create the athlete thinking about all of these type of things. If it's like, why are you not eating enough? Then they're thinking about that. Then they're probably not going to listen to advice that's coming from that, but they're just like constantly thinking about food and all that sort of stuff. And then if it's, demonizing certain types of food, cutting out food because it's labeled bad is not going to help them in the long run. And then it also then creates probably that binging cycle where I'm not allowed to eat this, but then I'm going to eat it all, like during certain times.
Yeah, and then they can't create that nice balance or consistency, or they just have this perpetual cycle of going up and down all the time. Mm-hmm. In terms of the eating, so when they're feeling like shit, they really feel like shit, and unfortunately the food continues to reinforce that, and they feel, I guess, they go through this gluttony phase, and as a result, they feel like crap, and it's like, what do I do to myself? And then they go completely the other way, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna clean up my diet, chicken, rice, broccoli, tuna, whatever it may be. They just got extreme, and then basically, I feel it like, I'm just bored and monotonous. It tastes bland, tastes like, I don't know, hospital food or something like that. There's no flavour to it, and they go completely the other way. And they might binge on pizza, salty foods, whatever it may be, whatever their vice is, specifically. So the last thing we want to do is we want to talk about how certain foods are actually going to help. So rather than tell them what to avoid, it's like the thing with the kid before, the analogy, is we actually want to direct them what they should be doing more specifically. So say, for example, right, some of the kids here, they only eat certain foods. I'll go with Mia. So Mia, you're great, but you're a good example of this, of how we've kind of gone from like expanding. She likes certain foods specifically, but during the lockdowns, I was able to work with her a lot more closely and actually work on the nutrition side, and we've been able to slowly expand that side with her as well. So I'm not saying she says certain foods that she hates and finds disgusting. It's like, what are you willing to try beyond that? And I think I'm trying to categorize foods that she hasn't tried, or she might have tried once or twice, and she's like, oh, that's not too bad. I'm like, cool. Can we start to incorporate that once or twice a week? I'm like, yeah, cool. All right, fine. Then we do that. And then we continue that repetition. Then we start to expand on what she can actually, what she wants to eat. And that's the bigger part. Otherwise, we just pigeonhole ourselves, and like, if we're not actually addressing or adding things that she may potentially like, and we kind of just rinse and repeat that whole cycle when it comes to food. And I'm not demonizing foods that she currently eats. Like, some of it's not crash hot or anything like that. But I'm beginning her to shift beyond just what I don't specifically want her to eat all the time. So, and that helps her create more of a finer balance and continue that shift away and expand what she's able to access, or what she wants to access herself specifically.
And I think she actually enjoys talking about food here. Like, she'll come in and it'll be like, oh, what's for dinner? And then she's like, oh, I'm cooking today. Like, she'll be complaining about it, but
yeah,
it's a conversation. Like,
it's a conversation, and we're positively highlighting. Well, we're shining a light on food specifically. Like, even though, we got Will. He loves his steak. Like, I love my steaks as well. He's a Brazilian background as well, and yeah, he always talks about food. He absolutely loves it, and I was like. And that's great. We want them to have a really good relationship, like a good relationship with food, not just limiting things. And there's certain things that he doesn't like anyone, but it's just like, I just don't like the taste. It's not because I've been told to avoid it specifically as well. And Will, he's very lean, very fast metabolism. Like, he's gained a couple kilos since he started. I think about 2 kilos since he started. But we just really encourage him to enjoy the food that he's eating, and because he's trying to put on some muscle mass and he's only 16 years old, he's going to have to eat a little bit more, and he's physically active quite often as well. So we're trying to support his growth and development, but also help him put on some size at the same time.
Also, another thing, I think the idea of not eating too close to exercise has actually kind of been blown out of proportion sometimes, because some of the kids definitely in here don't want to eat after school because it's too close to exercise, but then they come in feeling pretty tired from school. And like a couple of the girls I've said, oh, like, have you thought of even just having a muesli bar before you come in? And they're like, oh, but like, I don't want to eat too much before I train. I'm like, that's fine. Like, especially if you're eating it on your way home from school or something like that. Like, it's just any sort of thing said about food really plays a big role in their thinking about it, I think, and even subconsciously.
What's the old thing? It's like, oh, you shouldn't eat within half an hour of getting into the pool.
You'll sink.
If you're single, I don't know where that came from, but I heard that when I was really young. It's like you shouldn't eat half an hour before you get into the pool.
An hour and a half.
Oh, I don't know. It's
Too
like,
much.
yeah, that's another story for another day. Yeah, so that's kind of like the power and influence of what words have, and obviously that specific thing about not eating a half hour before getting into the pool has carried on. But the funny thing is, though, a lot of our swimmers will have something small to eat before they train, before they get in the pool. So, and usually they're up at at 4:45 and then they're at the pool by 5:15 and ready to train by 5:30.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, where is the kind of the middle ground? I think we've just worked in absolutes for so long, and it's just like, and we've carried what's worked potentially for someone may not work for someone else. And I think that's why we go back to the individual based approach and having some things that may work. It's like, hey, try this, and we'll just slightly modify it to meet your needs of what information that we've got from you through conversations. As we said in the last one, we love conversations here.
Yes, but I've got another point. Going away from food, but if we're talking about what a parent or a coach is saying, and if it's kind of like you have to do this, the athlete is probably likely to not want to do it. So if you're talking about you have to, I don't know, a parent saying like you have to do homework 5 times a week, the kid is probably not likely going to do the homework 5 times a week. Like, you've kind of got to phrase things in a way that sounds like they're coming up with it as well. Because, you don't want to be told exactly how you have to live your life, so they're not going to be being told the same thing. Yeah,
so what I do there is, especially what I did with me, it's like I made the suggestion. Like, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing that? I was like, can we try this? And like, when can we try it? And just continue to ask questions. And what they do is they formulate when they're actually going to try it. And it kind of makes it less of a daunting task to actually do and achieve. So it's positively worked out as well. Like, they're starting to look like swimmers as they get a little bit older now. Energy level is good, staying on top of injuries, and being able to properly nourish them as well by beginning to educate them. Once they've made that change, it's like, all right, this is what the food is doing to you. Mm-hmm. It's helping you support growth, development, injury repair, whatever it may be. We just want to make sure that you got an adequate amount of macros and micros in your diet so you can continue to swim. And if your goal is to swim at college level or overseas or whatever it may be, we need to make sure that we're doing the basics really well, not always the 100%, but regularly well over a consistent period of time.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool. But yeah, one of the things, go back into words, is the biology of belief. Now, this is a term that Dr. Bruce Lipton came up. I think he's a psychologist. Long story short, he said between the ages of 1 and 7 is when a lot of kids learn through osmosis. So what they hear, what they see, what they touch, what they sense. And what you say is really important at these ages, because I think learning happens when the brain is going through delta wave brain activity as well. Don't quote me on that. And this is when they're really learning from their environment. So what you say and what you do really influences them in terms of their development. So whatever issues that stem later on in their lives, whether teenage, adolescence, early adulthood, or whatever it may be, can be somewhat stemmed back to these early stages of development in terms of what's being said, what you've been exposed to, and these behaviors can, unfortunately, positive or negative, can linger until awareness is actually addressed at that level. And then you can start to, overcome these potential issues. So it's really powerful what we do say, and we shouldn't be demonizing or demonizing certain things, but we should also bring awareness that food in itself or training, whatever it may be, needs to be considered more of a positive than a negative. And I think that's probably the main message about our discussion here is when we demonize something, we bring too much negative attention to it, then the likelihood of us being able to make positive changes is going to be really difficult to shift, because we as humans are built on survival. And if we have all these fears that we've developed over time based on based on our own beliefs or indoctrination by others and in our environment, we're going to have real big issues being able to break that down later on down the track as well. So I believe exposing or encouraging kids and teens just to, in whatever way, even if they do really badly, like they make a screw up on the field, right? As a coach, rather than get pissy at them, it's be like, have a sit down 20 minutes after or half an hour after the match and be like, hey, what happened at this moment? Do you remember? Then they'll be able to open up to you. Then that's going to be the real process of them overcoming, especially if it's a repeated behavior as well. So that's what I like to do with a lot of the athletes, is try and bring attention and awareness through, it's a counseling-based approach essentially, but asking questions. It's like, what was going through this point? Can you recall? If there's no awareness around it, continue to ask questions about it. Do you remember what you did here and here? I just can't, because this is what I just normally do. Okay. Do you feel like that's actually beneficial or a hindrance to you? It's like, it's hindrance. Okay, cool. And then what do you think we can do moving forward in order to overcome these things? Do X, Y, and Z. Maybe allow them to find the solution first. If they can't find the solution, potentially guide them. Say, hey, at training, we're going to work on this. Or when you do your warm-ups before games, we're going to just do like a mental rehearsal kind of thing. Just walk through those specific scenarios that you feel like you're tripping up, and try and reinforce or make that change in that that performance or that rehearsal of the outcome that you do want to happen. Then as a result, you'll be able to overcome that as well. So rather than pointing out on the negative, on the stuff ups, unfortunately, if you keep pointing that out, they will continue to repeat it. But if we do if we kind of give it the time to actually break it down and actually bring awareness to it of the stuff up and what's actually happening, then we can potentially break down those bad habits later on down the track. But the words that we do say do influence what happens over time. You ask any athlete that had a bad coach and a good coach, they'll easily be able to identify what's made them bad and what's made them good. And usually it's the language and the verbiage they use with them specifically will determine whether or not they feel like they're a bad or good coach. And like, every coach is considered bad and good, I reckon, but for different reasons. Because does that coach specifically work well with that individual? Sometimes it's not the case, which is totally fine. That's why we have, thousands and thousands of coaches. That's why we have so many clubs. Gives the individual the opportunity to find a place where they can actually continue to grow and develop. And eventually, like if you're talking about coaching, you may hit a ceiling effect with a certain coach, which is actually not a bad thing. It just means their capacity of where they can help you and where they can direct you is just limited. So the next phase is find that next coach and move on to the next thing, because ultimately you got to look after your own development at the end of the day. So I forgot what we were talking about.
My key point from what you just said as well is especially asking questions to the athletes, because I believe everyone loves to talk about things. They love to connect by conversation as well. And I just think that, asking someone questions and suggesting things, like as we're talking about food, movement, literally anything, exercise, asking questions and bringing it out in that way is going to get you a lot further than telling.
Sorry about that. You need to bring it to their attention. It's literally it. Bring it to their attention. If they feel like that, I just feel like crap, thinking about this. All right, cool. It's like, what are the next stages for you to overcome this? What do you think you need to do? It's like, I don't know. If you did know, what would you think it would be? And it's like, because you're asking the same question in a different way. And that's been really helpful specifically for me to help a lot of the youth athletes be able to overcome certain issues, especially when it gets really tricky when other people are involved as well. So,
Yeah. And even for mental health, as you were saying, it's kind of like a therapist approach, which honestly, communication is all kind of the same. But with one of my girls who's struggled a lot with mental health and kind of stresses, it was more of a, do you think anyone else could help? Do you think you could have this conversation with anyone around you? Do you think it's not, I think you should see someone, I think you should speak to this friend. It's just kind of getting them to think.
You're not talking down to them, you're talking at their level. It's a huge deal. And I think it's not spoken about. And like the old adage of trying to lecture people and telling people what to do is kind of like, it's not dead in the water. There's a time and place for it. If you're working with large groups, I'm like, it's hard to work with people on an individual level. But because we've got the luxury of working with people in very small groups and even one-on-one from time to time as well, we can afford to have the time and give it the space in order to have these conversations. It might take 20 minutes to half an hour in a session or something like that here, but what's the actual potential effect later on down the tracks? 2 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 months down the track. So, in saying that, our words have real power in what we have to say. Just from the environments that I've actually worked in as well, and from the experiences that I've actually seen, and also the stories that I've heard as well. And I think going back to the individual-based approach, everyone wants to be treated as an individual, not as a number. But there are times where you just do have to be a bit more generalized, but then you need to go down a specific route with some individuals as well. So some people, they don't even need the help or assistance. Like, there's happening to truck on by. So some people actually do need that time and space. And when you understand where they've come from, you get a bit of more of an idea of kind of, okay, this individual may need just a bit more assistance that we don't know about, and they might need more conversations. But I think as a coach, as a business owner, as someone who's a former athlete as well, I'll wrap this up with this last story because it's about what happened to me specifically. It was a grand final. I was playing rugby for the first season ever. I was like 18 at the time, and the preliminary final, we actually played pretty well. I ended up scoring a try, so no nudie runs for me, which is good. I was playing third grade, so it was my first time playing, and I had to back up second grade that day, straight afterwards somewhere else. Long story short, they were selecting the team for the grand final, and there was a team that I actually hadn't played because I was playing representative somewhere else. And long story short, the coach, I found out the coach had actually benched me, and I was like, oh, this is kind of weird because I actually hadn't been benched for the whole season. And unfortunately, I came on with 20 minutes to go, and for those who played rugby union, coming on with 20 minutes to go and you're down by I think it was 2 or 3 tries. I'm like, I'm not going to be able to make much of an impact here, unfortunately. Then, unfortunately, we lost the grand final. Then later on that night, we go back to the club rooms, and some of the players come up to me. It's like, hey, you should have started. And I'm like, I know, and I felt like crap that day as well. The problem for me, there was no appropriate justification. I played well the game before. We were undersized. I was probably about this size, maybe a little bit lighter at the time. And the coach never gave me appropriate justification as to why I got benched or anything like that. After I slowly started to hit my stride in the back end of the season. I had an injury in the middle of the season. I was out for 4 or 5 weeks with a grade 2 MCL tear. And I was fine. Came back. Felt pretty good. The coach was pushing me. I came to all the training sessions. I did what was required to get back into the side because I really wanted to play. And then, unfortunately, I just didn't get that appropriate justification. And I've heard this story so many times where, unfortunately, the athletes don't get that appropriate justification. And it's like, I can't understand why. And we've had another kid here who had the exact same thing. He was part of a representative team. He was playing really well. And unfortunately, he got And the coach was saying all these positive things. Like he said, like, who's your favorite player? I won't name who it is, but who's your favorite player? He answered it really well, rather than be like all the flashy razzle dazzle guys. And he named it, and the coach was like, that's a good player to actually emulate your game off. And like he said the right things. Training was really good, but yeah, he did all the right things, but it still wasn't enough. Then he ended up finding out, like it was like a week before the season started, that he actually got cut. And then they made way for 3 other players as a result, because those 3 other players would cover the position that he played.
Took 3 players to cover one position.
I don't know. It's a lot. It's a bit of a story, but to me, it still doesn't make sense in terms of the justification of what actually happened to him as well. So, and it's like, this is this is really not good. It's like, it's not really looking at the interest of the team and the club and the players, and I guess the welfare and the men. And unfortunately, they left him specifically in a really bad, well, not a bad state, but just really left it on bad terms. And it's like, you try out next year, blah, blah, blah. But there was no like real justification and nothing for him to really go back and work on. And that was probably the biggest problem, that he was kind of like, he was cut. But it's like, why don't you just say why, the initial, like, what's your main intentions? Because we want these 3 players. Unfortunately, these 3 players have been, told to come down because, the higher ups, because he was part of a representative development team, the higher ups want these kids to come through the system. Unfortunately, we have to make room. And if that was the case, like, it was super competitive, and like, we don't have any, like, the coach said, like, look, to be honest, I don't have any say. I'm really sorry about this. It came from a place where he was genuine. There'll be probably no qualms about it. Probably give him a bit more fire in his belly, but then it just left him in a really bad state as a result. So the words that we do say, whether it's around food, nutrition, training, coaching, teaching, education, like every field, literally, I don't know.
Communication.
Yeah, communication is really key, and understanding the person where they are at, and be able to use these probing questions, like I said, a counselling-based approach that we use that we use here, is really impactful and powerful to really set the kids up for success, and be able to go back to one of our, mantras. The best success is self-success. When you're teaching these kids to become successful by themselves, but showing them the way on how to do that, and how to question themselves, and be able to problem solve and think on their feet a little bit more for themselves, because some kids are wrapped up in cotton wool. Mum and daddy do everything for them. So we'll leave that there. This one's a bit of a longer one, but yeah, hopefully you've got something, some tips, and and hopefully if you do resonate with this podcast specifically, because I think we were going a bit general with this one, but I think we went really pretty deep pretty quickly with it.
Yeah, it was good.
If it resonates with you, well, I'm happy to talk a little bit deeper into this, and we can actually bring someone in specifically to actually talk about, I guess more of a counselling-based approach for coaches, and also for parents as well. But I guess parenting is a separate thing in itself. But as coaches, there's a lot that can be gained from just utilizing this type of system, and really kind of allow the kids to think for themselves, and number one is giving them the space to think for themselves as well, especially the way school's set up. You don't really get the space or opportunity, or you get shut down as a result by the teachers or your peers. But in a one-on-one basis, you give them the space, eventually they'll open up.
And on that as well, us as individual coaches and as a business really pride ourselves on this, like our ability to connect with our clients and our athletes. So if any of you guys are listeners that are here and have things you want to talk to us about, or even if anyone else is just interested in coming here to train and to chat, like, that is something that we're really big on. So shameless plug for the business there.
Yeah, screw it. Thanks.
You have just listened to the Inner Athlete podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.